Usually when we talk about a building's architecture, there's this underlying expectation of permanence.
Right, absolutely.
You pour a massive concrete foundation, you erect these giant steel I-beams, you bolt it all together, and the architect points at it and basically says, there it is. It's solid. That will stand for a century.
Yeah, because it's governed by the immutable laws of physics. I mean, it's visible, it can be mathematically tested against known weights, and most importantly, the ground underneath it generally stays still.
Right. But then you step into the world of enterprise information security, and suddenly those steel I-beams are completely invisible.
Exactly.
You are designing a fortress in the clouds, and the clouds are actively changing shape. And worse, you have highly motivated adversaries actively trying to pull the ground out from under you while you're building it.
It is a completely different paradigm. You aren't just designing for stability, You are designing for continuous hostile instability.
Yeah, and that is exactly what we are unpacking in this deep dive. If you are listening to this, you are stepping into a highly analytical, custom-tailored masterclass on the official CISSP exam knowledge base.
Yes, we are.
Specifically, we are systematically conquering Domain 3, which is security architecture and engineering.
Which is an absolute beast of a domain, by the way. I mean, it represents roughly 13% of the entire CISSP exam.
Wow, so that is a massive chunk of your final score.
It really is. And the reason this specific domain feels so overwhelming to so many candidates is because, well, its concepts aren't just sitting neatly in one single textbook chapter.
Right, they're scattered all over.
Exactly. In the official study materials, these topics are distributed across 10 different chapters. It is essentially the technical backbone of the entire exam.
So whether you are actively prepping to sit for the CISSP, or you are just, insanely curious about how enterprise security is fundamentally engineered from the microscopic silicon chip all the way up to the concrete data center, you are in the right place. We are going to link theoretical principles directly to exam question logic, and more importantly, to the actual why and how of real-world architectural decision-making.
Because if your foundational philosophy is flawed, your architecture will fail. I mean, no matter how many millions of dollars you spend on high-end firewalls, we really have to start with the blueprints.
So let's start with the blueprints then. The biggest philosophical blueprint shift in modern security history. I'm talking about the transition from the legacy trust but verify model to zero trust.
Right. So trust but verify was the gold standard for decades. We often call it the castle and moat approach.
The castle and moat.
Yeah. The idea was simple, right? You build a massive, heavily fortified wall. There's security perimeter, and you put all your guards at the drawbridge.
Okay, makes sense.
You verify everyone trying to get in. But once someone crosses that drawbridge, once they are inside the network, they are largely trusted.
So to put a scenario to this, imagine Bob from accounting. Bob badges into the corporate office, connects to the internal corporate Wi-Fi, and the network basically says, hey, you're physically inside the building, you passed the firewall, we trust you.
Precisely. And that trust gives Bob, or, anyone impersonating Bob, the ability to perform lateral movement.
Lateral movement, right.
If an attacker sends Bob a phishing email and Bob clicks a malicious link, his laptop is compromised. And because the network inherently trusts Bob's laptop, the attacker can just jump from that laptop to an internal file server, and from that file server to the customer database.
Wow. Because the internal network is essentially flat and unrestricted.
Exactly.
So the modern answer to that is zero trust. The philosophy of never trust, always verify. You assume breach. You assume the attacker is already sitting inside the network.
Yes. It doesn't matter if the request is coming from the CEO's desktop hardwired right into the corporate headquarters or from a random coffee shop in another country. The scrutiny is exactly the same.
So no VIP treatment?
None. Every single access request must be authenticated, authorized, and encrypted before access is granted to an asset.
But hold on, let me push back on this a bit, because it seems to contradict another massive design principle. We constantly hear about KISS keep it simple, stupid.
Oh, yeah.
The idea that complexity is the enemy of security. If I have to authenticate every single microtransaction for every single user everywhere all the time, aren't I building a fragile, overly complex nightmare?
That is a paradox that trips up a lot of test takers, actually. It sounds more complex to implement a system where every single file server and database has its own bouncer at the door, right?
Yeah, it sounds exhausting to manage.
But zero trust actually simplifies the rules of engagement.
How so?
Well, in a legacy trust but verify system, your firewall rule base becomes this tangled web of conditional logic. You have Hundreds of different rules, like if the user is on this IP subnet, allow it. If they are on a VPN, allow it, but restrict this port. If they're in the branch office, do
Right.
this.
I've seen those rule lists. They're a nightmare to audit.
A total nightmare. Zero trust simplifies the policy to one uniform philosophy. Trust no one, verify everything explicitly. The technology enforcing it, like microsegmentation, might be highly granular, but the design philosophy is uniform, consistent, and logically simple.
Ah, okay. So the policy is simple, even if the technological enforcement is granular. That makes a lot of sense. Let's look at another core design principle, which is defense in depth.
Also known as layered security. This is the use of multiple disparate controls to protect an asset.
Like an onion.
Like an onion, exactly. If one control fails, it shouldn't result in the immediate exposure of your systems. But the key mechanism to understand for the exam is that these controls must be in series, not parallel.
Meaning they happen one after the other.
Right.
Because if I have a firewall and an intrusion detection system looking at the exact same network traffic at the exact same time, that's parallel. If the attacker bypasses one, they likely bypass both simultaneously.
Exactly. Defense in depth means you have an external firewall. Then, deeper in the network, you have an access control list on the specific server. Then, the application itself requires multi-factor authentication. And finally, the database holding the data is encrypted at rest.
Sequential overlapping barriers.
You got it.
And working hand in hand with that is the principle of least privilege.
Right. Subjects are granted only the privileges absolutely necessary to perform their assigned work tasks and no more. If you only need to read a file to do your job, you are not given write or delete permissions.
Keep it restricted. And closely related is separation of duties, or SOD.
Yes, separation of duties ensures that no single person has total control over a critical function. It takes two or more people to complete a sensitive task.
I always think of it like at a movie theater.
Oh, how so?
Like one person takes your money and hands you a ticket. A completely different person stands at the hallway and tears the ticket in half to let you in. If the same person did both, they could just pocket your cash and let you walk in.
That's a perfect real-world example. Separation of duties prevents fraud by forcing collusion, you know? Two people would have to agree to break the rules together.
Right, which is much harder to pull off. Now let's talk about how systems behave when they break. Because this is a massive trap on the exam, the difference between fail-safe and fail-secure.
Yes. I know people use these interchangeably in normal conversation, but they mean very different things architecturally.
Completely different. So let's break it down.
Okay, so if a system fails secure, it defaults to a state that protects assets and data. This usually means failing closed, access is denied to everyone.
Okay, and fail-safe.
If a system fails safe, the priority is protecting human life and personnel safety. This usually means failing open.
So let's map this to a physical building to make it concrete. If the power completely cuts out at a maximum security prison, the electronic cell doors should fail secure.
Right.
They lock down, they fail closed, so the prisoners don't escape and compromise the asset, which is the security of the prison.
Correct. But if the power goes out in a commercial office building, the electronic fire exit doors must fail safe. They automatically unlock, failing open, so people don't burn to death trapped inside.
And the official CISSP exam knowledge base has a very strict hierarchy here, right?
Absolutely it does. Human safety is always, without exception, the #1 priority.
Above everything.
Above all data, above all hardware, above all company secrets. If you have an exam question where the choices pit data preservation against human safety is always the correct architectural answer.
That is a crucial mindset. You can't replace people. Let's touch on one more philosophical pillar before we get into hardware. Privacy by design, or PBD?
PBD. This is the concept of integrating privacy protections into products during the earliest blueprint phase, rather than trying to, bolt them on as an afterthought just before the product launches.
Right. There are 7 foundational principles to privacy by design.
Yes, and while you don't need to recite them all from memory, you really need to understand their intent.
Like what?
Like being proactive rather than reactive, anticipating privacy risks before they even happen. Making privacy the default setting so the user doesn't have to dig through menus to protect their data.
That's huge.
It is. Also embedding privacy into the core design, ensuring end-to-end lifecycle protection, meaning you don't just secure data when it's collected, you secure it until it is permanently and safely destroyed.
Okay, so we have our blueprints. We want zero trust, defense in depth, separation of duties, and privacy embedded by default.
Right.
But how do we actually build this into a machine? Let's dive into the microscopic guts of the system, the hardware and operating system capabilities.
At the very core of a secure operating system are protection rings. This is how an OS organizes code and components into concentric circles of privilege to protect the system from itself.
I've always pictured this like a target with a bullseye. The innermost ring is ring 0, going outward to ring 3.
Exactly. Ring 0 is the bullseye, and it has the absolute highest level of privilege. This is where the operating system kernel resides.
The kernel.
Yeah, code running in ring 0 can access any hardware resource, any file, any memory location directly. As you move outward to ring 1 and 2, you typically find OS components and hardware device drivers.
And the outermost ring, ring 3, is user mode.
Right. Ring 3 is where your everyday applications run, your web browser, your word processor, your video games.
So if I'm running a web browser in ring 3 and I want to save a PDF to my physical hard drive, my browser can't just reach through the rings and touch the hard drive hardware.
No, absolutely not. It has no direct hardware access.
Yeah.
A process in a higher numbered ring, like ring 3, has to ask for permission to use resources controlled by a lower numbered ring.
How does it ask?
It executes what's called a system call. The kernel in ring 0 receives the request, verifies if the ring 3 application is allowed to do that, and then the kernel actually interacts with the hard drive on behalf of the application.
Ah, so it's a mediated access model.
Exactly.
And this is exactly why, if my web browser crashes or gets infected with a malicious script, my entire computer doesn't blue screen and die. The crash is contained within ring 3. The kernel in ring 0 just keeps humming along.
That's the exact architectural intent, insulation. But to make that insulation work, the operating system also needs memory protection.
Right.
Because if your malicious web browser in ring 3 can just scan the random access memory, the RAM, and read the memory space where your password manager is running, all the protection rings in the world won't save you.
Wow, yeah. So how does the OS physically prevent that?
It uses process isolation. The OS gives every single running application its own distinct virtual memory space. The application thinks it has the whole computer to itself, but the OS is actually strictly policing the boundaries.
That's clever.
It is. And to take it a step further, there is hardware segmentation, which uses the physical CPU to enforce those memory boundaries rather than just relying on OS software logic.
And what about when attackers try to overflow those boundaries? The official CISSP exam knowledge base specifically highlights ASLR and DEP. What do those actually do?
Well, let's start with the attack they're trying to stop, which is the buffer overflow. Imagine an application asks you for your name, and it allocates a tiny box in memory, a buffer, designed to hold exactly 10 characters.
Okay, 10 characters.
But instead of typing Bob, an attacker types, 1,000 characters of malicious executable code.
Right.
The extra characters overflow the 10-character box and spill into adjacent memory spaces. The attacker carefully crafts this overflow so that it overwrites the application's return pointer.
The return point.
Yeah, it's the instruction that tells the computer what to do next. The attacker changes that pointer to say, hey, go execute that malicious code I just spilled into memory.
That's wild. That's a buffer overflow. So how does ASLR stop it? And what does it stand for?
ASLR stands for Address Space Layout Randomization. For a buffer overflow to work, the attacker has to know exactly where in memory their malicious code landed so they can point the computer to it.
Right, they need the exact address.
Historically, operating systems loaded core components into the exact same memory locations every single time you booted the computer. It was totally predictable.
So the attacker could just hard code the memory address into their malware.
Right. ASLR fixes this by shuffling the deck. Every time the computer boots or every time an application loads, ASLR randomly changes the memory addresses where the executable code and libraries are stored.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So the attacker pours their malicious code into memory, but because the layout is randomized, they have no idea what address to point to. If they guess wrong, the application just crashes instead of executing the malware.
Okay, so ASLR hides the target. And what about DEP, Data Execution Prevention?
DEP is another layer of defense. It marks certain areas of memory as non-executable. The memory space meant to hold your name in our earlier example is strictly for data, not code.
So if an attacker overflows that space
and tries to force the CPU to execute the spilled characters as a program, DEP steps in and says, no, this memory region is flagged for data only. I refuse to execute anything here.
So ASLR hides the target and DEP neutralizes the ammunition. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Now, bringing this all together, we arrive at one of the most critical architectural concepts for the exam, the trusted computing base, the security perimeter, and the reference monitor.
Yes.
These are logical concepts, but I always find it helpful to visualize them as a physical space.
That's a good way to do it. So the Trusted Computing Base, or TCB, is the combination of all the hardware, software, and firmware that are responsible for enforcing your security policy.
Yeah.
It is the only portion of the entire computer system that you inherently trust. And the golden rule of the TCB is that you want it to be as small and simple as possible so it's easier to mathematically verify that it has no flaws.
I visualize the TCB as the ultra-exclusive VIP section of a massive nightclub. The people inside that VIP section, the core trusted kernel processes, have been vetted, verified, and are fully trusted.
And separating that VIP section from the rest of the untrusted, chaotic nightclub is the security perimeter. It is the imaginary boundary that divides the trusted TCB components from the non-TCB components.
It's the velvet rope.
Yes, the velvet rope. And standing at the gap in that velvet rope is the reference monitor.
Ah, the bouncer.
Exactly. The reference monitor is an abstract concept. It is the core access control enforcer. It stands between every single subject, like a user or a program, trying to access every single object, like a file or a hardware device. It verifies credentials against the security policy before any request proceeds.
So it is the ultimate unbribable bouncer at the velvet rope, checking the VIP list every single time.
Every single time. The reference monitor is the theoretical concept, and the actual software or hardware implementation of it is called the security kernel.
Security kernel.
Right. And for the exam, you absolutely must memorize the 4 properties of a reference monitor. We use the acronym NEAT. N-E-A-T.
Let's break those down. What makes a bouncer neat?
Well, N stands for non-bypassable. Every single access request must go through the reference monitor. There are no backdoors, no side entrances. You cannot sneak around the bouncer.
Okay, got it. E, evaluable.
The code for the security kernel must be small, modular, and simple enough to be thoroughly tested and mathematically verified to be correct. I mean, if the bouncer's rulebook is 10,000 pages of contradictory rules, you can't evaluate if he's doing a good job.
That makes sense. A is always invoked.
It checks the rules every single time. Even if you just asked to read a file 1 millisecond ago, if you asked to write to that file now, it checks the rules again. It never assumes you still have access.
And finally, T, tamper-proof.
It must be protected from modification by unauthorized subjects. A malicious program running in Ring 3 cannot be allowed to reach in and alter the reference monitor's rulebook. So, non-bypassable, evaluable, always invoked, tamper-proof.
Neat. That's a great acronym. So we've secured the physical machine and its memory, but what if we want to run multiple independent operating systems on the exact same physical hardware? We need virtualization.
We do.
And for the CISSP, we need to know the strict distinction between a Type 1 and a Type 2 hypervisor.
Right. So a hypervisor is the software that creates and runs virtual machines. A Type 1 hypervisor is a native or bare metal hypervisor. There is no underlying host operating system.
Wait, really? No OS at all?
None. The hypervisor software is installed directly onto the raw physical hardware of the server, and the virtual machines run directly on top of that.
Oh, okay. This is what you see in massive enterprise data centers, right? Like VMware, ESXi, or Microsoft Hyper-V.
Exactly. It maximizes hardware resources because there isn't a bulky host OS consuming RAM and CPU. It also dramatically increases security because you eliminate the vulnerabilities associated with a host OS.
Contrast that with a Type 2 hypervisor.
A Type 2 is a hosted hypervisor. Let's say you have a standard Windows laptop. You install a software program like VirtualBox or VMware Workstation on top of Windows, just like you would install Microsoft Word. Then you run a Linux virtual machine inside that program.
So the Linux VM has to talk to the Type 2 hypervisor, which then has to talk to the Windows host OS, which then finally talks to the hardware.
Right. It's much slower, and from a security architecture perspective, it's significantly riskier.
Because of that host OS layer.
Yeah. If the underlying Windows host OS gets compromised by malware, every single virtual machine running on top of it is instantly compromised too. Type 2 is great for developers testing code on their laptops, but it is not what you deploy in an enterprise server farm.
Got it. Now, as we wrap up this physical and logical baseline, we need to discuss specialized hardware modules. Because software alone isn't always enough to protect cryptographic keys, we have TPMs and HSMs.
Yes. A TPM, or Trusted Platform Module, is a dedicated, tamper-resistant cryptographic microchip built right into the motherboard of a computer, laptop, or server.
So it is permanently married to that specific piece of physical hardware.
Yes. It can generate cryptographic keys, stores small amounts of sensitive data, and it is the absolute backbone for full-disk encryption systems like Microsoft BitLocker. One of its most powerful features is remote attestation.
Remote attestation. How does that work?
When the computer boots up, the TPM measures the hardware configuration in the boot files and generates a cryptographic hash. It basically takes a snapshot of the system's state.
Okay.
When that computer tries to connect to the corporate network, it presents that hash. The network compares it to a known good baseline. If the hashes match, it proves the system hasn't been tampered with or infected by a rootkit before it's allowed on the network.
That's incredibly powerful for zero-trust architectures. And how does an HSM differ from a TPM?
An HSM, or hardware security module, is a much broader and more powerful category. Technically, a TPM is a type of HSM, but when enterprise architects talk about an HSM, they're usually referring to a dedicated high-end appliance. It might be a PCI Express card you slide into a server, or a standalone network-attached appliance sitting in the data center.
So it's not bound to a single laptop. It's serving the whole enterprise.
Exactly. HSMs are incredibly fast and highly tamper-resistant. If someone physically tries to pry an HSM open, it is designed to instantly zero out and permanently erase all the cryptographic keys it holds.
Wow, self-destruct mode.
Basically, yeah. They are used for the heavy lifting of enterprise key management, digital signature generation, and protecting the root keys of a public key infrastructure.
So we have the physical hardware secured, we have our protection rings and memory segmented. Our reference monitor is standing at the velvet rope checking every request. But how does that reference monitor actually know what the rules are?
Right.
Where is the VIP list? That brings us to formal security models. We need a mathematical way to dictate the flow of data.
Right. You can't just tell a computer, keep this secret. You need formal, logical models that map abstract human security policies into explicit mathematical rule sets that a machine can execute without ambiguity.
And the undisputed heavyweights of the CISSP exam are the Bell-LaPadula model and the Biba model. Let's start with Bell-LaPadula.
Bell-LaPadula was developed in the 1970s, largely driven by the U.S. Department of Defense. Its entire singular focus is on confidentiality, preventing unauthorized disclosure of information, keeping secrets secret.
It operates on a system of clearance levels and classification labels, right? Like unclassified, secret, and top secret.
Exactly. And it dictates the flow of information between those levels using two primary rules or properties that you absolutely must memorize for the exam: the simple security property and star property.
Okay, let's break them down. What is the simple security property?
The simple security property states no read-up. A subject at a lower clearance level cannot read an object at a higher classification level. A subject with secret clearance cannot read a top-secret document.
That makes intuitive sense. If I'm a mid-level intelligence analyst, I shouldn't be reading the four-star general's classified war plans. No read-up. Simple.
Exactly. But the second rule is the one that twists people's brains. The star property, often written as an asterisk, states no write-down.
No write-down.
Right. A subject at a higher clearance level cannot write data to an object at a lower classification level.
Wait, let me puzzle through this. Why wouldn't a four-star general be allowed to write a memo to a mid-level analyst? No write-down seems to break normal human communication.
It does break normal human communication. But remember, the computer doesn't know what the general is writing. It only enforces the math of confidentiality. Let's look at the vulnerability it's actually trying to stop.
Okay, give me a scenario.
Imagine the general opens a top-secret document, copies a paragraph of text, and then pastes it into an unclassified email to send to the analyst.
A highly classified secret has just been leaked into an unclassified environment.
Exactly. Or consider a Trojan horse attack. The general inadvertently downloads a malicious program that runs with his top-secret privileges. Without the no write-down rule, that malware could silently read all his top-secret files and copy them into an unclassified public folder where a low-level spy could easily access them.
So the system completely prevents this by enforcing no write-down. You cannot move data from a high level to a low level, intentionally or accidentally. The general would have to log out of his top-secret session and log in as an unclassified user to write that email.
Yes. There is also a third, less tested rule called the strong star property, which states that a subject can only read and write to objects at their exact same clearance level. No reading up or down, no writing up or down. But the main two are no read up, no write down.
Okay, now let's completely switch gears and look at the Biba model.
Biba was created as a supplement to Bell-LaPadula. While Bell-LaPadula cares exclusively about confidentiality, Biba cares exclusively about integrity, preventing the unauthorized modification of data.
And structurally, Biba is literally the exact inverse of Bell-LaPadula, which brings up the visual memorization trick from the official CISSP exam knowledge base. This is a massive lifesaver.
It really is.
If you are taking the exam, as soon as you sit down at the testing center, grab your dry erase board and draw this out.
It works flawlessly. So you draw a horizontal dotted line across the middle of your board. Above the line, write Bell-LaPadula and the word confidentiality. Below the line, write Biba and the word integrity.
Okay, I have my dividing line.
For Bell-LaPadula, in the top half, draw an arrow pointing UP, put an X through the arrow, and label it SRR for simple read. That is your visual for no read up.
Got it.
Next to it, draw an arrow pointing down ON, put an X through it, and label it *W for star write. That is your visual for no write down.
So I have my two Bell-LaPadula arrows, no read up, no write down.
Now, to get the rules for Biba, you literally take those two arrows you just drew and flip them vertically across the dotted line like a mirror reflector.
Oh, wow. So the no read up arrow reflects down and becomes an arrow pointing down. No read down for Biba.
Right.
And the no write down arrow reflects up, becoming an arrow pointing up. No write up for Biba.
Exactly. So Biba's simple integrity property is no read down, and Biba's star integrity property is no write up.
That is incredibly easy to remember mechanically, but let's explain the why. Why does integrity require no read down?
Let's use a hospital scenario. Think of integrity as a measure of purity and accuracy. You are a senior cardiovascular surgeon, a high-integrity subject. You are about to operate on a patient. When deciding where to cut, should you be reading the high-integrity official lab results, or should you be reading down to an unverified Wikipedia article?
Obviously, the lab results. If I read down, I am corrupting my high-integrity decision-making process with low-integrity data. So, no read down.
Perfect. Now apply that logic to no write-up. Should a high school intern volunteering at the hospital, a low-integrity subject, be allowed to write or modify data in the official hospital financial ledger?
Definitely not. They cannot write up to a higher integrity level.
Right.
Biba enforces that mathematically. But as fascinating as Bell-LaPadula and Biba are, they are very rigid, very military-style lattice models.
Yeah.
What about models designed for normal commercial businesses? That brings us to Clark-Wilson.
Clark-Wilson is incredibly important. It's an integrity model designed specifically for real-world commercial environments, like banking and finance. It doesn't use simple read-write arrows. It protects integrity using three main components: subjects, objects, and programs. We call it the access control triplet.
So a subject, the user, doesn't interact directly with an object, the database.
Exactly. In a Clark-Wilson model, a bank teller cannot open the back-end SQL database and just manually edit an account balance. The teller, who is the subject, must log into the banking application software, which is the program, and the software interacts with the database, the object.
Why add that middleman?
Because the software acts as an intermediary that enforces well-formed transactions, the software ensures that if you withdraw $100 from an account, it automatically records the transaction, updates the audit log, and subtracts $100 from the master ledger.
Oh, so it handles all the required steps.
Right. It forces the data to be modified only in predictable, strictly controlled ways, preserving the integrity of the entire system. Clark-Wilson also explicitly enforces separation of duties.
Okay, let's pivot to a model that deals with a very specific human problem, Brewer-Nash, also known historically as the Chinese wall model.
Brewer-Nash is designed entirely around preventing conflicts of interest. Unlike the static clearance levels of Bell-LaPadula, Brewer-Nash dynamically changes a user's access controls in real time based on their previous activity.
To make this concrete, let's say I work for a massive global accounting firm. We have hundreds of clients. I audit Coca-Cola. Can I also audit Pepsi?
Under Brewer-Nash, no. When the system is configured, all the data for Coca-Cola and Pepsi are grouped together into the same conflict class because they are direct competitors. On your first day at work, you have the potential to access either one.
But the moment I make a choice.
The moment you, the subject, open a file belonging to Coca-Cola, the Brewer-Nash model instantly and dynamically builds an impenetrable wall around Pepsi's data. You are permanently blocked from accessing anything else in that specific conflict class for the duration of your assignment.
It mathematically prevents you from creating a conflict of interest.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense for law firms, consulting agencies, and financial analysts. So we've explored all these theoretical models, but if I'm an enterprise architect and I want to buy a new firewall from a vendor, how do I know the vendor actually implemented these secure design principles properly? How do we evaluate a system?
That's where the common criteria comes in. It's an international standard, officially known as EFSO IEC 15408, used to rigorously evaluate the security claims of IT products. You need to know the terminology here for the exam.
Okay, lay it on me.
The actual product you are evaluating, let's say it's that new enterprise firewall, is called the target of evaluation, or TAO.
Okay, the TAO is the physical box on the table.
Hmm.
Now, as the customer who wants to buy a firewall, I have a specific list of security requirements I needed to meet.
That list of customer requirements is called the protection profile, or PP. It outlines the security needs, the I wants of the consumer. On the other side of the table, the vendor who built the firewall publishes a highly detailed document explaining all the security features they've built into the product.
And what's that called?
That document is called the security target, or ST, the I will provide.
So the evaluation process is essentially taking the vendor's security target and measuring it to see if it satisfies the customer's protection profile. And the result of all this independent lab testing is a score.
Yes, the evaluation assurance level, or EL. It's a scale from EL1 to EL7. And you need to understand the progression of rigor here.
Where do we start?
EAL1 means the product is functionally tested. It basically just proves the product does what it claims to do on the box. It's cheap and relatively easy to achieve.
It's like turning on a car to see if the engine actually starts.
Precisely. EL2 means it is structurally tested. EL3 is methodically tested and checked. EL4 is methodically designed, tested, and reviewed. EL4 is a critical benchmark, by the way. It is generally considered the baseline standard for solid, commercial-grade security products.
But what if I'm buying a system for a nuclear power plant or a top-secret intelligence agency?
Then you move up the scale. ELL5 is semi-formally designed and tested. ELL6 is semi-formally verified. And the absolute pinnacle is EL7, formally verified, designed, and tested. EL7 requires exhaustive mathematical proofs that the system's design is flawless. It is incredibly expensive, takes years to complete, and is reserved only for the highest risk, life-critical systems.
So we have evaluated our hardware, and we have modeled exactly who gets to access the data while it sits on the server. But here's the massive architectural problem. Eventually, that data has to leave the safety of our server. It has to flow across the wild, untrusted, open internet.
Yes, it does.
And the moment it leaves our network, all those access controls and reference monitors become completely useless.
Which is why we need to protect the actual bytes themselves, not just the hard drives they live on. We need cryptography, the mathematical art of disguising data.
Cryptography is a huge portion of Domain 3, and it broadly breaks down into two massive categories: symmetric and asymmetric cryptography. Let's tackle symmetric first. A good way to remember this is that SAM is a synonym for symmetric.
Exactly. Symmetric encryption uses the exact same cryptographic key to both encrypt the plaintext data into ciphertext and to decrypt the ciphertext back into plaintext. The sender and the receiver must share this one secret key.
The classic analogy here is a locked briefcase. Imagine I want to send you highly sensitive documents. I have a physical key, and you have an identical copy of that physical key. I put the documents in the briefcase, snap the lock shut with my key, and hand it to a random courier. Even if the courier tries to open it, they can't.
Right.
When it arrives at your desk, you use your identical key to open it.
It's a great analogy, and symmetric cryptography has one massive advantage, which is speed. The mathematical operations involved are relatively simple, making it incredibly fast. We use it for bulk data encrypting hard drives, databases, and large file transfers. But it has a fatal, crippling flaw, which your analogy just inadvertently highlighted.
Which is?
How did you and I securely share those identical physical keys in the first place? If we live on opposite sides of the world and the internet is untrusted, how do I get the secret key to you without someone intercepting it? This is called the key distribution problem.
Ah, I see. If I send the key through the mail, someone could copy it. If I send it over email, it's not encrypted yet.
Yeah, exactly. Furthermore, symmetric cryptography does not scale well in large organizations. If you want to communicate securely with 100 different people, you can't use the same key for everyone, or else they can all read each other's mail. You need a unique shared secret key for every single pair of users.
And the math on that scales out of control quickly, right?
It does. The mathematical formula for calculating the number of symmetric keys needed is n times, in parentheses, n minus 1, all divided by 2, where n is the number of users.
So if I have 1,000 employees in my company, that's 1,000 times 999, which is 999,000, divided by 2, that is 499,500 unique symmetric keys that my IT department has to securely generate, distribute, and manage. That is an absolute administrative nightmare.
Which is why we don't rely on it exclusively. But before we get to the solution for that, you need to know the major symmetric algorithms for the exam. The undisputed king is AES, the Advanced Encryption Standard. It replaced the old DES standard. AES uses key lengths of 128, 192, and 256 bits and operates on a fixed block size of 128 bits.
Other symmetric algorithms include 3DES, which is now deprecated, Blowfish, Twofish, and RP4, which is a stream cipher historically used in old Wi-Fi protocols like WP. But I want to pause on something you just said about AES. It operates on a block size of 128 bits. What does that actually mean mechanically?
Well, a block cipher takes a chunk of your plaintext data, say, exactly 128 bits of a document, and encrypts that entire chunk all at once as a single mathematical unit. Then it grabs the next 128 bits and encrypts that. But the vital architectural question is, how do you string those blocks together? This brings us to the operational modes of symmetric block ciphers.
The simplest mode is electronic codebook, or ECB, and from what I understand, it is notoriously terrible.
ECB is entirely insecure for encrypting anything larger than a single block of data. In ECB mode, each 128-bit block of plaintext is encrypted completely independently, using the exact same secret key.
Why is that bad?
Because any duplication in the plaintext will produce the exact same duplication in the ciphertext. Let's use a visual example. Imagine you have a digital image of a solid black square with a white circle in the middle. If you encrypt that image file using ECB mode, the ciphertext won't look like the original image. It will look like static.
Okay.
But because all the identical white pixels encrypted into the exact same identical ciphertext blocks, you will still clearly see the distinct outline of a circle shining through the static.
The pattern is preserved.
Yeah.
And in cryptography, patterns are fatal, right? If an attacker sees repeating ciphertext blocks, they can start deducing the underlying plaintext.
Precisely. To destroy those patterns, we use cipher block chaining, or CBC mode. CBC uses a mathematical operation called XOR, combined with an initialization vector, or phi-v.
Hold on, let's define XOR for a second, because it's the heartbeat of cryptography. Exclusive OR.
XOR is a binary logic operation. It compares two bits. If the bits are the same, two ones or two zeros, the output is 0. If the bits are different, a 1 and a 0, the output is 1. It's just a way of mathematically mixing data.
Okay, so how does CBC use it to fix the pattern problem?
CBC takes a random string of bits, the IV, and XORs it with the very first block of plaintext before encrypting it. That scrambles the first block. Then it takes the resulting ciphertext of that first block and XORs that with the next block of plaintext. It chains the blocks together.
Oh, I see. So even if block 1 and block 2 are identical pieces of plaintext, because block 2 is mixed with the messy output of block 1, it will result in completely different ciphertext. The pattern is destroyed.
Exactly. But CBC has a downside. Because every block relies on the output of the previous block, you have to process the data in order. You cannot run it in parallel across a multi-core processor. And if a single bit gets corrupted during network transmission, the errors propagate down the chain and ruin the decryption of the subsequent blocks.
Which leads us to counter mode, or CTR.
Right. CTR solves the speed issue. Instead of chaining blocks of data, it encrypts a simple incremental counter value. It encrypts 1, then 2, then 3. It takes the encrypted output of that counter and XORs it with the plaintext. Because the counter is predictable, you can encrypt and decrypt thousands of blocks simultaneously in parallel. It essentially turns a block cipher into a lightning-fast stream cipher.
But CTR lacks one crucial thing: data integrity protection. It provides confidentiality, but we need a way to mathematically prove that an attacker didn't tamper with the bits while they were flying across the internet.
Which is why the modern gold standard, the mode you will see highly favored on the exam, is Galois counter mode, or GCM. GCM combines the incredible parallel processing speed of CTR mode with Galois message authentication. It provides what we call authenticated encryption. You get confidentiality, and you get a cryptographic guarantee of data integrity, all in one fast package.
So we have AES GCM for fast, secure, symmetric encryption. But we still haven't solved that massive key distribution problem from earlier. How do we share the secret keys securely? That is where asymmetric cryptography steps onto the stage.
Asymmetric or public key cryptography is a mathematical marvel. Instead of one shared secret key, every single user is issued a mathematically linked key pair, a public key, and a private key.
I rely on a physical analogy for this one too: the open padlock. Asymmetric cryptography is like having an open padlock that you send to anyone in the world. That's your public key. I can email my open padlock to you. I can post it on my public website. Anyone can take my open padlock, snap it onto a briefcase full of secret data, and lock it.
But here is the magic. Once that padlock snaps shut, the only thing in the known universe that can unlock it is your specific private key. And you keep that private key safely hidden in your pocket. You never share it with anyone.
So if I want to send you a secret message, I don't need a shared secret key. I just find your public key online, use it to encrypt the message, and send it over the open internet. Even if an attacker intercepts it, they can't read it. Only you can read it by decrypting it with your private key. It completely solves the key distribution problem.
Exactly. Now, symmetric encryption uses relatively straightforward math like substitution and XOR. Asymmetric encryption relies on incredibly difficult one-way mathematical functions known as the work factor.
The most famous being RSA.
RSA relies on the mathematical difficulty of factoring the product of two incredibly large prime numbers. Multiplying two massive prime numbers together is very easy for a computer. But taking that massive result and figuring out which two primes created it, that takes classical computers thousands of years. If you see factoring attack or prime factorization on the exam, immediately associate it with RSA.
But because that math is so heavy, RSA requires very large key sizes to be secure, usually 2048 bits or 4096 bits. That takes a lot of processing power, which isn't great for a tiny smartwatch or a mobile phone battery.
Which is why we developed elliptic curve cryptography, or ECC. ECC relies on the algebraic structure of elliptic curves over finite fields. The math is different, but the architectural benefit is massive. ECC offers equivalent cryptographic strength to RSA, but with significantly smaller key sizes.
How much smaller?
A 256-bit ECC key is roughly equivalent in cryptographic strength to a 3072-bit RSA key. That is a massive savings in memory, bandwidth, and CPU power. If an exam question asks about securing low-power devices, mobile phones, or the Internet of Things, the answer is almost always ECC.
Okay, so RSA and ECC handle encryption. We also have Diffie-Hellman.
Diffie-Hellman is slightly different. It does not encrypt data. It is a mathematical protocol used exclusively to allow two parties to securely agree on a shared symmetric key over an insecure public network. It's a key exchange mechanism.
Now, here is where asymmetric cryptography gets genuinely mind-bending. We just said that if I want to keep a secret, I encrypt the data with your public key. But the official study materials state that asymmetric cryptography is also used to create digital signatures. And to do that, I am supposed to encrypt the hash of a document with my private key.
Yes, that's correct.
Wait, hold on. I struggle with this paradox every time. You just established that my public key is public. Anyone in the world can download it. If I use my highly protected secret private key to encrypt a document, literally anyone in the world with my public padlock can decrypt it. That provides zero confidentiality. Why on earth would I do that?
You are absolutely right. It provides zero confidentiality. But a digital signature isn't trying to hide a secret. It is trying to prove authenticity and provide non-repudiation.
Let's break that down. Non-repudiation means I can't deny that I sent it.
Right. Think about the mathematical logic. If I receive a document from you, and it is encrypted with your private key, and I am successfully able to decrypt it using your public key, what did that mathematical operation just prove to me?
It proved that the document could have only possibly been encrypted by your exact private key. And since you're the only person on Earth who possesses that private key, you're the only person who could have sent it.
Exactly. It is a brilliant inversion of the mechanism. Encrypting with the recipient's public key provides confidentiality. Encrypting with your own private key provides non-repudiation and authentication. A digital signature binds your identity to the data.
But wait, you didn't say we encrypt the whole document. You said we encrypt the hash of the document. We haven't defined a hash yet. What is a hash, and why don't we just sign the whole document?
A hash is a cryptographic one-way function. Algorithms like SHA-2 or SHA-3 take an input of any size, whether it's a one-sentence email or a 4-gigabyte video file, and crush it down into a fixed-length string of characters, like 256 bits.
It's like a digital fingerprint for the file.
Precisely. And it has a property called the avalanche effect. If you change even one single comma in that massive 4-gigabyte file, the resulting hash value will change completely. We don't digitally sign the entire document because asymmetric encryption is very slow. Instead, we hash the document to get its fingerprint, and we encrypt just that tiny fingerprint with our private key. That is a digital signature.
So when I receive it, I decrypt the signature with your public key to get the hash. Then I hash the document myself. If the two hashes match perfectly, I know two things. One, you definitely sent it, which is authentication. And two, the document hasn't been altered by a single comma in transit, which is integrity.
That is exactly how it works. But for this entire global system of public and private keys to function, We need a way to actually trust that a public key belongs to who it claims to belong to. If a hacker generates a key pair and says, "Hi, I'm Amazon.com, here's my public key," how do I know it's really Amazon?
We need an infrastructure of trust.
Yeah.
We need PKI.
Public key infrastructure. PKI is essentially the DMV of the internet. It issues digital certificates specifically following the X.509 standard. An X.509 certificate mathematically binds a user's identity to their public key, and it is digitally signed by a trusted third party.
That third party is the Certificate Authority, or CA.
Right. The CA is the entity that issues and signs the certificates. Underneath the CA is the Registration Authority, or RA. The RA is the entity that actually does the legwork of verifying your identity before telling the CA to issue the certificate.
The RA checks your driver's license, the CA prints the digital ID badge, and if my laptop gets stolen and my private key is compromised,
then the CA places your certificate on a certificate revocation list, a CRL. Modern browsers check the CRL, or they use a faster protocol called OCSP to see if a certificate is still valid before trusting it.
So we have built the ultimate mathematical fortress. We have symmetric AES for speed, asymmetric RSA and ECC for key exchange and signatures, hashes for integrity, and PKI to manage trust. The math is flawless. Which brings us to a sobering reality.
Attackers rarely attack the math. Trying to brute force a modern 256-bit AES key would take all the supercomputers on Earth longer than the lifespan of the universe. It is a futile effort.
So what do they do instead? This leads us perfectly into vulnerability assessment and cryptanalytic methods. If they can't break the math, how do they break the system?
They attack the implementation, the environmental variables, the humans, and the architectural flaws. Let's look at cryptanalytic attacks first. The attacker is trying to deduce the secret key by looking for weaknesses in the data itself.
The most basic is a ciphertext-only attack.
The attacker only has access to the encrypted data flying across the network. They use frequency analysis and statistical models to try and find repeating patterns. This is incredibly difficult against modern algorithms, but it's what defeated the Enigma machine in World War II.
Then there's the known plaintext attack.
The attacker has a copy of the intercepted ciphertext, and they somehow obtained a copy of the original plaintext message. They use both to reverse engineer the secret key.
But the chosen plaintext attack is even more aggressive.
Yes. In a chosen plaintext attack, the attacker has the ability to feed their own arbitrary text into the victim's encryption machine and then analyze the resulting ciphertext that comes out. They use advanced techniques like differential cryptanalysis. They feed in two messages that differ by only one single bit, and they mathematically analyze how that tiny change cascades through the encryption algorithm.
The attacks that I find truly fascinating are side-channel attacks, because the attacker isn't looking at the ciphertext at all. They're looking at the physical exhaust of the computer.
Side-channel attacks exploit the physical reality of the hardware running the cryptography. For example, a timing attack. An attacker precisely measures the exact number of milliseconds it takes a CPU to perform a cryptographic operation. Because computing a 1 might take a fraction of a millisecond longer than computing a 0, the attacker can watch the CPU processing time and slowly map out the secret key bit by bit.
That is terrifying.
It gets worse. There are power consumption attacks, which monitor the electrical draw of the microchip during encryption. And there are electromagnetic emanation attacks. The U.S. government standard for dealing with this is called Tempest.
Right, the idea that an attacker could literally park a van outside your office building, point an antenna at your wall, and reconstruct your cryptographic keys just by reading the faint radio frequencies bleeding off your computer monitor and cables.
Exactly. And you mitigate side-channel attacks through physical architecture, heavily shielding your cables, adding random artificial delays to CPU processes to mask the timing, and building Faraday pages, which we will cover in physical security.
Okay, so attacking the crypto is hard. What's infinitely easier? Attacking the passwords.
Much easier. The most basic password attack is brute force, trying every possible character combination A, then B, then C until you guess the password. But that's slow, so attackers rely on rainbow tables.
What exactly is a rainbow table?
Remember how we said hashes are one-way functions? You can't decrypt a hash back into a password. So attackers generate massive multi-terabyte databases where they take billions of common passwords, hash them all in advance, and store the results in a giant lookup table, a rainbow table.
So if the attacker hacks into a database and steals a list of hash passwords, they don't have to spend weeks cracking them. They just query their rainbow table. Hey, does this stolen hash match anything in the database? And the table instantly spits out the plaintext password.
Exactly. It trades computational time for storage space. And the architectural cure for rainbow tables is salting.
How does salt fix it?
A salt is a random string of extra bits added to the user's password before the system hashes it. So if two different users both have the terrible password, password123, the system adds a random salt to each one. Now their resulting hashes look entirely different from each other.
And more importantly, the resulting hash doesn't match the pre-computed hash in the attacker's rainbow table. It renders the massive database useless.
Exactly. But salting alone doesn't slow down a direct brute force dictionary attack, which is why modern architecture requires key stretching.
What does key stretching do? Algorithms like PBKDF2, Bcrypt, or Archon2.
Key stretching deliberately makes the hashing process computationally expensive and incredibly slow. Instead of running the password through the hash function once, an algorithm like PBKDF2 runs it through thousands or tens of thousands of times in a loop.
So for a normal user logging in once a day, it takes half a second instead of a millisecond. They don't even notice.
Right. But for an attacker who just stole a database of 1 million passwords and is trying to guess millions of combinations a second using a cluster of high-end GPUs, that half-second delay per guess destroys their attack. It makes brute forcing financially and practically impossible.
But let's look at a scenario where the attacker doesn't even care what the plaintext password is. Let's talk about the pass the hash attack. I like to compare this to sneaking into the VIP tent at a music festival.
Walk me through the analogy.
If I want to get into the VIP tent, the bouncer doesn't ask for my driver's license. The bouncer just looks at my hand to see if I have the glowing UV VIP stamp. The stamp is the authentication token. If I somehow copy that stamp from someone else's hand onto my own, the bouncer lets me in. He doesn't care what my actual name is.
That is a perfect representation of pass the hash. In a Windows Enterprise environment, when a user logs in, the operating system stores a hash of their password in active memory, specifically in a process called LSAS, the Local Security Authority's subsystem service. It keeps the hash there so the user doesn't have to type their password every time they access a new network drive. Single sign-on.
So the hash sitting in LSAS is the glowing VIP stamp.
Exactly. If an attacker gains local administrator rights to a machine, they can dump the memory of the LSAS process and steal those hashes. They don't need to crack the hash to find the plaintext password. They just present the stolen hash to the network authentication protocol, and the network grants them access. They literally just pass the hash.
And this leads to devastating lateral movement, especially when we talk about Kerberos exploitation.
Kerberos is the default authentication protocol for Active Directory. It relies on a system of tickets. If an attacker manages to compromise the domain controller, they can steal the password hash of a highly sensitive hidden account called the KRBTG2D account.
The Kerberos ticket granting ticket account.
Yes. If they get that hash, they can perform a golden ticket attack. They can mathematically forge their own valid authentication tickets for any user, for any service, for any length of time. They effectively mint a master skeleton key that grants them total, undetectable compromise of the entire domain. It is the ultimate nightmare scenario for an architect.
Terrifying. Let's shift gears slightly and look at system and application vulnerabilities. The exam outline heavily emphasizes cloud architecture. We have SASE, PaaS, and ISC. What is the fundamental difference in risk here?
The most critical architectural concept here is the cloud shared responsibility model. Think of it like pizza. If you use ISS infrastructure as a service, like renting raw AWS servers, it's like renting a kitchen. The vendor provides the building and the oven, which is the physical servers and hypervisor, but you have to bring the dough, the cheese, and do all the cooking. You are responsible for patching the OS, securing the applications, and managing the data.
What about PaaS, platform as a service?
That's like getting a pizza delivered. The vendor manages the OS, the runtime environment, and the back-end infrastructure. You just bring your custom application code and your data.
And software as a service,
Yeah.
like Microsoft 365 or Salesforce.
That's like eating out at a restaurant.
Yeah.
The vendor manages almost everything, and this is a huge but for the exam under the shared responsibility model, no matter what cloud model you use, you can never outsource your ultimate accountability. In SaaS, you are still entirely responsible for your users' identities, their access controls, and the security of your proprietary data.
You cannot outsource your risk. I like that. What about software vulnerabilities? Things like race conditions.
A race condition, often called TOC/TOU, time of check to time of use, happens when a system checks if a user has permission to access a file, but there is a slight delay before the system actually opens the file. In that tiny fraction of a second, an attacker races in and swaps the safe file for a malicious file. The system checked the safe file, but executed the malicious one.
And databases. The outline specifically contrasts inference versus aggregation attacks.
These are subtle but distinct. An aggregation attack is a mathematical database flaw. A user lacks clearance to see the total company payroll, but they have clearance to query the payroll of individual departments. They query all 5 departments and mathematically aggregate the results themselves to deduce the secret total. The system gave them the pieces.
And an inference attack.
An inference attack relies on human deduction and contextual clues, not just database math. A user queries non-sensitive data like noticing that the CEO, the lead counsel, and the head of HR are all suddenly booking flights to the same obscure city where a rival company is headquartered. The human brain infers the classified secret. A merger is about to happen.
Finally, we have to mention IoT. Internet of Things devices, smart thermostats, connected cameras, smart light bulbs. Why are these such an architectural nightmare?
Because they are almost never designed with security as a core concept. They have tiny processors that can't handle complex cryptography. They often have hard-coded, unchangeable default passwords, and the manufacturers rarely issue firmware patches.
So how do we mitigate that architecturally?
Through network segmentation. The slang term is putting them behind 3 dumb routers. You isolate IoT devices onto their own distinct, heavily restricted VLAN. If an attacker hacks the smart thermometer in the fish tank in the lobby, the network segmentation prevents them from pivoting laterally to the corporate domain controller.
Okay, we are entering the final stretch. We have designed the network blueprints, modeled the logical access, encrypted the data flowing over the wire, and mitigated the software vulnerabilities. But none of that matters if an attacker can simply walk into your data center with a sledgehammer and smash the servers. We are moving to the physical realm site and facility physical security controls.
Physical security is the ultimate foundational layer of the OSI model, and we need to reiterate the golden rule, the absolute priority that trumps everything else on the CISSP exam.
Personnel safety is always priority number 1.
Say it again. Engrave it in your mind because it will be the answer to multiple scenario-based questions. Personnel safety is always the priority. Above stopping the hackers, above saving the servers, above preventing data loss. If a physical control threatens human life, it is the wrong control.
Got it. So how do we design a safe, secure facility from the ground up? We use a methodology called CPTID, crime prevention, through environmental design.
CPTID is a fascinating architectural approach. It uses the passive physical design of the environment to subtly manipulate human behavior and reduce crime. It has 3 main pillars. The first is natural access control.
How does that work?
Instead of just relying on a big, ugly guard shack, you use landscaping, decorative bollards, winding walkways, and lighting to naturally guide legitimate visitors to the proper, heavily monitored entrances. Simultaneously, you use thorny bushes or uneven terrain to naturally discourage people from walking near restricted areas.
The second pillar is natural surveillance.
This is all about eliminating hiding spots, designing open lines of sight, putting windows in the right places, keeping outdoor areas well lit. Criminals want to operate in the shadows. If a space is designed so that anyone walking by can easily observe what's happening, intruders feel exposed and uneasy, which deters crime. Think about how bank ATMs are usually placed in highly visible, brightly lit areas.
And the third pillar is territorial reinforcement.
This is about making the area feel like a cared-for, cohesive community. Using clear signage, well-maintained decorative fences, and clear property lines, it makes legitimate users feel a sense of ownership over the space, making them more likely to challenge strangers. And it immediately signals to intruders that they have crossed a boundary into a space where they don't belong.
But passive design is just the start. We also need active perimeter and internal safeguards, fences, gates, automated bollards to stop vehicle ramming, and my personal favorite, internal control access control vestibules, historically called man-traps.
An access control vestibule is a small physical room with 2 interlocking doors. The first door must fully close and securely lock behind you before the system will allow the second door to open into the secure area.
What specific vulnerability does that mitigate?
It is the absolute best defense against tailgating or piggybacking. That's when an authorized employee badges in and a malicious actor just grabs the door and casually walks in right behind them. The vestibule prevents this. If the system detects 2 bodies in the small room using weight sensors or cameras, the second door refuses to open and security is alerted.
Now, earlier we talked about side channel attacks. The guy sitting in the van in the parking lot, reading the electromagnetic waves from our servers. How do we physically stop that?
We use Tempest-certified shielding. Architecturally, we can build a Faraday cage. This is a metallic enclosure often built right into the drywall or the server rack that completely absorbs and blocks electromagnetic fields. It prevents the signals from leaking out of the building.
Okay, let's look at the actual environmental controls inside the server room itself. HVAC is surprisingly critical to security.
Heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Servers generate an immense amount of heat. But it's not just about managing temperature, it's about humidity control.
What happens if the humidity is wrong?
If the air is too dry, you generate massive amounts of static electricity, which can instantly fry a sensitive motherboard. If the air is too humid, you get condensation, leading to corrosion and short circuits. And architecturally, you must ensure the server room has positive air pressure.
Positive pressure means that when I open the door to the server room, the air from inside the room blows out into the hallway.
Exactly. It creates a physical barrier of air that pushes contaminants, dust, and smoke away from your sensitive servers.
Speaking of smoke, let's talk about fire suppression. The exam requires you to know the 5 classes of fire extinguishers.
They are vital. Class A is for common combustibles, wood, paper, trash. Class B is for burning liquids like oil or gasoline. Class C is for electrical fires. This is critical for IT. Class D is for combustible metals like magnesium. And Class K is for kitchen fires involving cooking oils.
In a massive data center, we can't just rely on handheld extinguishers. We have automated suppression systems. Generally, they fall into water systems or clean agent gas systems. Let's break down the water systems first.
The most common system you see in a standard office building is a wet pipe system. The pipes in the ceiling are constantly full of pressurized water. If a fire starts, the heat melts the small glass bulb on the sprinkler head, and water instantly sprays out.
But you absolutely do not want a wet pipe system in a data center.
Never. Because if a pipe develops a leak, or a technician accidentally hits a sprinkler head with a ladder, your millions of dollars of servers are instantly flooded and destroyed even though there was no fire.
So as an alternative, we have dry pipe systems.
In a dry pipe system, the pipes hold pressurized air instead of water. The water is held back by a valve outside the room. If the sprinkler head breaks, the air escapes, the pressure drops, the valve opens, and water rushes in. It prevents minor leaks from dripping, but it's still risky.
Which is why the gold standard for data centers is the pre-action system. Walk me through the mechanics of a pre-action system.
A pre-action system requires 2 completely separate triggers before a single drop of water is released. First, a smoke detector or a heat alarm in the room must trip. That tells the main valve to open and water rushes into the empty pipes.
But it still doesn't spray yet.
Right, it's primed, but the sprinkler heads are still sealed. The second trigger occurs only if the fire gets hot enough to physically melt the thermal link on the individual sprinkler head. Only then does the water discharge, and it only discharges from that specific melted head. It drastically reduces the chance of accidental flooding while still suppressing a real fire.
But water ruins electronics anyway. So whenever possible, architects prefer clean agent suppression systems like FM200 or Novec 1230.
Clean agents are incredible. They discharge as a gas and suppress the fire by chemically disrupting the combustion reaction or by rapidly absorbing heat. The massive benefit is that they leave absolutely no residue. The gas clears, and your servers are perfectly fine.
Now, didn't we used to use halon gas for this?
We did, and the exam might test your historical knowledge here. Halon is banned by the Montreal Protocol. Not only does it severely deplete the ozone layer, but more importantly, when halon interacts with high heat, it degrades into highly toxic, lethal gases.
And as we stated earlier, the golden rule.
Personnel safety is priority number 1. You cannot flood a server room with toxic gas if humans might be trapped inside.
Wow. We have covered an astonishing amount of ground today. Let's recap this massive architectural journey through Domain 3. We started with the abstract, philosophical blueprints of zero trust and defense in depth. We learned how hardware enforces boundaries with protection rings and ASLR. We modeled the flow of data logically using Bell-LaPadula for confidentiality and Biba for integrity.
From there, we dove deep into the complex mathematics of cryptography over untrusted networks. We contrasted the bulk processing speed of symmetric AES with the key distribution elegance of asymmetric RSA and ECC. We established digital trust using hashes, signatures, and PKI.
Then we confronted the brutal reality of how adversaries exploit the architecture. They bypass the math to steal password hashes from LSAS memory, forge Kerbero's golden tickets, and exploit cloud misconfigurations. And finally, we poured the physical concrete, securing the perimeter with CP-TED, defeating tailgating with vestibules, and protecting the environment with pre-action fire suppression.
Mastering Domain 3 is grueling, but it doesn't just help you pass the CISSP exam. It fundamentally upgrades the way you view the digital world. It makes you a true architect. You start seeing the matrix of enterprise security, understanding how a single logical flaw in a CPU register can ripple upward and compromise an entire global supply chain.
It's an incredible perspective shift. But before we sign off, we promised a final provocative thought, something derived from the official CISSP exam knowledge base that forces us to look toward the future of architecture.
We need to talk about the impending reality of quantum computing and post-quantum cryptography, or PQC.
Right. Earlier, we discussed how asymmetric encryption like RSA relies on the extreme difficulty of factoring massive prime numbers, and how classical computers would take thousands of years to crack it.
Classical computers process bits as ones or zeros, but quantum computers use qubits, which leverage quantum superposition to represent both 0 and 1 simultaneously. When we reach a technological milestone called quantum supremacy, a functional, stable quantum computer will be able to run a mathematical formula called Shor's algorithm.
What does Shor's algorithm do?
It can almost instantly solve those prime factoring and discrete logarithm problems. The day a sufficient quantum computer comes online, RSA, Diffie-Hellman, and traditional ECC become entirely obsolete. The math is broken.
Now, some listeners might think, well, functional quantum computers are still years away. I'll worry about changing my encryption then. But there's a very specific active threat model called Harvest Now, Decrypt Later.
Exactly. Highly advanced adversaries, often nation-states, are actively scraping and storing vast petabytes of encrypted asymmetric traffic passing over the global internet today. They cannot read it right now, the math is holding, but they are hoarding it on massive server farms.
They are waiting.
They are waiting for the day they spin up a powerful enough quantum computer. When they do, they will retroactively decrypt all of those historical secrets.
So if you are an architect transmitting data today that has a secrecy lifespan of 20 or 30 years, things like military intelligence, proprietary pharmaceutical trade secrets, or highly sensitive healthcare data, that data is already actively at risk today.
It is a stark, chilling reminder. In security architecture, you aren't just designing a fortress to withstand today's known threats. You are actively racing against tomorrow's physics.
Racing against tomorrow's physics, and hoping your invisible digital I-beams hold strong. What a thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Domain 3. Keep studying, stay secure, and remember, never trust. Always verify.